Stories and Documentary Network.
The fall of an empire is never sudden. It does not crash down in a single moment, nor does it leave a clean break in history. Rather, it fades, fracturing under pressure from within and without, until what remains is a skeleton of power, occupied by new faces carrying new banners, but still haunted by the symbols of the old world. Such was the fate of the Western Roman Empire. And in its shadow, among the crumbling monuments and collapsing institutions, rose new powers that would shape the future of Europe. Among the most powerful and enigmatic of these were the Ostrogoths. By the close of the 5th century CE, the Western Roman Empire had already crumbled under the weight of its own contradictions. For centuries, it had been in slow decline, its economy weakening, its borders vulnerable, and its legions stretched thin across a landscape too vast to govern. Barbarian tribes, once seen as foreign invaders, had become federated allies, and later, governors of Roman provinces. When the last Roman emperor of the West, the boy Romulus Augustulus, was deposed in 476 CE by the Germanic warlord Odoacer, it seemed the curtain had closed on the Roman order in Europe. Yet Rome was not dead. Its laws, its language, and its cultural prestige still pulsed through the veins of the continent. The people of Italy, Gaul, and Iberia still saw themselves as heirs of a greater civilization. And into this fragile post-imperial world stepped the Ostrogoths, a Germanic people once allied with the Huns, now free, hardened by war, and eager to carve out their own destiny from the ruins of empire. The story of the Ostrogoths is not merely one of conquest. It is a tale of adaptation, ambition, and vision. It is the story of a people who did not simply destroy Rome, but sought to preserve it under new leadership. Under the rule of Theodoric the Great, the Ostrogoths would establish a kingdom in Italy that preserved Roman governance, maintained civil institutions, respected classical traditions, and attempted, if only for a time, to blend the legacy of Rome with the vitality of a new Gothic aristocracy. But who were the Ostrogoths? Their origins trace back to the steppes north of the Black Sea, where they once roamed as part of the broader Gothic people. Sometime during the 3rd and 4th centuries, the Gothic Confederation split into two major branches, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, the Western and Eastern Goths, respectively. The Ostrogoths fell under the domination of the Huns during the 5th century, becoming part of Attila's formidable war machine. But after the death of Attila in 453 CE, the Ostrogoths broke free, regrouped, and began a new chapter of independence. The Ostrogoths, unlike the Vandals or Franks, did not immediately lay waste to Roman culture. Many of their leaders, including the future king Theodoric, were educated in Constantinople, exposed to Roman law, Greek philosophy, and the politics of the Eastern Empire. They learned not just how to fight Rome, but how to rule it. This education would shape Theodoric's vision, not as a barbarian conqueror, but as a Roman-style king who governed with both sword and statute. But the Italy that Theodoric would eventually rule was a land in turmoil. After the deposition of Romulus Augustulus, Odoacer, a Germanic general of uncertain origin, took control and ruled as a de facto king, while still nominally submitting to the Eastern Roman Emperor in Constantinople. His reign was marked by tension with the imperial court, and by 488 CE, Emperor Zeno of the Eastern Roman Empire saw in the Ostrogoths an opportunity. He sent Theodoric westward with the mandate to depose Odoacer and bring Italy under more loyal administration. This convergence of imperial politics and Gothic ambition would lead to the foundation of the Ostrogothic Kingdom of Italy, a short-lived but historically significant state that bridged the ancient world and the early Middle Ages. For a brief and brilliant moment, under Theodoric's reign, the Italian peninsula saw peace, architectural revival, and cultural fusion. Roman senators debated in Gothic courts, Christian bishops negotiated between Arian and Nicene beliefs, and cities that had suffered under repeated invasions began to flourish once more. Yet beneath this stability lay tensions, religious divisions, cultural misunderstandings, and the ever-present question of identity. Could Goths and Romans truly share a kingdom? Was the Ostrogothic experiment a restoration of Roman glory, or merely a sophisticated interlude before the inevitable collapse? As we journey through this documentary, we will explore the rise and fall of the Ostrogothic Kingdom, from its tribal origins and Theodoric's remarkable ascent to its golden age in Ravenna, and finally to its slow disintegration under the weight of civil war and Byzantine conquest. Along the way, we will examine not only the battles and politics, but also the deeper themes, the tension between old and new, the resilience of Roman culture, and the complexities of identity in a time of transition. Before the Ostrogoths ruled the marble halls of Ravenna or clashed with the legions of Byzantium, they were a nomadic people, riders of the open plains, born of wind and war on the wide steppes north of the Black Sea. Their story begins not in Italy or Gaul, but in the wild and shifting lands along the Dniester and Dnieper rivers, where tribes moved like shadows across the horizon, and where the seeds of one of history's most formidable Germanic peoples first took root. The Goths were part of the great Indo-European migrations that reshaped Europe in antiquity. Scholars believe they originated in Scandinavia, possibly from the island of Gotland or the region around Götaland in southern Sweden. Sometime in the 1st or 2nd century CE, they began their southward journey, crossing the Baltic Sea and filtering into the fertile lands of present-day Poland and Ukraine. This migration, over generations, brought them into contact with Roman frontier provinces and the tribal confederacies of Eastern Europe. By the 3rd century, they had formed a powerful presence along the Black Sea. It was here, in the vast region between the Carpathians and the Caucasus, that the Gothic identity began to solidify. They were not a single, unified nation, but a loose confederation of tribes sharing a common language, cultural practices, and warrior ethos. Among these early Gothic tribes were the Tervings and Greuthungs, whose names would later evolve into the better-known Visigoths and Ostrogoths. The term Ostrogoth means Eastern Goth, distinguishing them from their Western cousins, the Visigoths. This division was both geographic and political. The Tervings, later Visigoths, settled west of the Dniester River and maintained closer contact with the Roman Empire, while the Greuthungs, the early Ostrogoths, occupied the lands to the east, embracing a more nomadic lifestyle and engaging with the various steppe peoples of the region. This division became more pronounced during the late 4th century, especially as the pressure from the east increased. That pressure came in the form of the Huns, a confederation of nomadic warriors from Central Asia. Around the 370s CE, the Huns surged into the Gothic territories with terrifying speed and ferocity. Their arrival sent shockwaves through the steppes and into the Roman frontier. The Ostrogoths were among the first to fall under their domination. Their tribal structures shattered, many Ostrogothic nobles were slain or subjugated, and their warriors were absorbed into the expanding Hun war machine. For decades, they lived under Hun overlordship, supplying troops, tribute, and support to Attila, the Scourge of God, who would become one of the most feared figures of late antiquity. Life under the Huns was harsh. The Ostrogoths, once proud and independent, now served a foreign master whose customs and leadership clashed with their own. But this period was not one of pure subjugation. The experience hardened the Ostrogoths, exposing them to new tactics of cavalry warfare, steppe diplomacy, and imperial ambition. They learned to fight as one united force, bound not just by tribe but by necessity. Some even rose within the Hunnic ranks, gaining favor and power in Attila's court. Meanwhile, their western cousins, the Visigoths, fled the Huns by seeking refuge inside the Roman Empire. Their request for asylum in 376 CE would lead to one of the most dramatic and violent confrontations of the late Roman world, the Battle of Adrianople in 378, where the Visigoths destroyed a Roman army and killed the Emperor Valens. In the decades that followed, the Visigoths carved out their own kingdom in Gaul and later in Spain. The Ostrogoths, however, remained bound to the Huns until Attila's death. That death came in 453 CE, under sudden and mysterious circumstances. With Attila gone, the cohesion of the Hunnic Empire crumbled. Subject peoples who had long suffered under its rule, Goths, Gepids, Alans, and others, rebelled. The decisive break came at the Battle of Nidau in 454 CE, where the former vassals of the Huns turned against their overlords and dealt them a crushing defeat. The Ostrogoths, led by a new generation of warlords, were now free. Freedom brought both opportunity and uncertainty. With the Hun threat gone, the Ostrogoths found themselves in a new power vacuum, one that stretched across the Balkans and up to the Danube. They migrated westward and southward, settling in areas vacated by the disintegrated Hunnic state. This brought them into increasing contact and conflict with the Eastern Roman Empire centered in Constantinople. It was during this time that one of the most consequential figures in Ostrogothic history rose to prominence: Theodoric, later known as Theodoric the Great. Born around 454 CE, the very year of Attila's death, Theodoric was the son of Theodemir, a Gothic noble who had forged a delicate alliance with the Eastern Roman Emperor Leo I. As part of this alliance, the young Theodoric was sent to Constantinople as a diplomatic hostage, a common practice designed to ensure loyalty between barbarian leaders and the empire. What was meant as a gesture of political control became, instead, a crucible for greatness. In Constantinople, Theodoric received a Roman education. He learned Latin, studied Roman law and military organization, and observed the inner workings of imperial court politics. He was not a mere barbarian warlord in training. He was becoming a statesman, one shaped by both Gothic tradition and Roman administration. When he returned to his people as a young man, Theodoric brought with him not only knowledge but ambition. He quickly rose to leadership among the Ostrogoths, uniting various factions under his command. The empire, increasingly unstable and vulnerable to internal divisions, alternately viewed Theodoric as both ally and threat. For years, he and the empire danced a dangerous game, sometimes collaborating against mutual enemies, sometimes clashing in open war. This period of movement, war, and shifting alliances across the Danube frontier laid the foundation for what was to come: a renewed campaign westward, a confrontation with the ruling power in Italy, and the birth of a kingdom that would attempt to fuse the Gothic warrior ethos with the lingering majesty of Rome. History has a way of shaping unlikely men into monumental figures. Among the shattered remnants of Rome's fallen west and the restless barbarian tribes pushing against its eastern borders, one man would rise not only to lead his people but to define a new political vision for Europe, a vision where a barbarian king could rule like a Roman emperor. That man was Theodoric the Great, king of the Ostrogoths. Born around 454 CE, just as the death of Attila the Hun shattered the nomadic empire that had long enslaved the Ostrogoths, Theodoric entered a world still reeling from upheaval. His father, Theodemir, was one of several Gothic chieftains seeking to reclaim sovereignty for their people in the Balkans. As was often the case with uneasy truces between the Roman Empire and the so-called barbarian tribes, diplomatic hostages were exchanged to secure loyalty. At around age 10, young Theodoric was sent to Constantinople, the jewel of the Eastern Roman Empire, as a royal hostage and symbol of peace. Yet far from being held in chains, Theodoric found himself in the gilded halls of imperial learning. The Byzantine court exposed him to the machinery of Roman civilization, its law, language, and ceremony. He was taught Latin and Greek, trained in military theory, and witnessed firsthand the rituals of emperorship. He moved through the corridors of power among bureaucrats and generals, senators and priests. By the time he returned to his people after 10 years in the capital, he was no longer merely a Gothic prince. He was a Roman-educated statesman, with a vision larger than his inheritance. Returning to the Ostrogoths in 471 CE, Theodoric quickly assumed leadership. The various Gothic groups in the Balkans were fractured, some loyal to Rome, others aggressively independent. Theodoric began consolidating power, using a combination of diplomacy and force to unify disparate Gothic warbands under his banner. His claim to leadership was strengthened not just by bloodline, but by reputation. He had become a bridge between two worlds, a Gothic warrior who spoke the language of emperors. However, the Eastern Roman Empire was not ready to let the Ostrogoths rise unchallenged. During the reign of Emperor Zeno, the empire faced a barrage of problems: usurpers, economic distress, and pressure on the Danube frontier. Theodoric, too, was not always cooperative. While at times he acted as a Roman general, magister militum, defending imperial territory from rival tribes, at other times he rebelled, raiding the Balkans and threatening Constantinople itself. The situation became a cycle of violence and uneasy truces. Neither side could fully defeat the other, and neither could wholly trust the other. Zeno, a shrewd and embattled ruler, saw an opportunity in 488 CE. In the west, the Italian peninsula had fallen under the control of Odoacer, a Germanic warlord of Scyrian descent. Odoacer had deposed the last Western Roman emperor in 476 and declared himself king of Italy, while nominally acknowledging the Eastern emperor's supremacy. But his autonomy troubled Constantinople. Zeno viewed Theodoric as a useful instrument: send the Ostrogoths to Italy to remove Odoacer and solve two problems at once: rid the Balkans of a rebellious Gothic army and neutralize a rival in Italy. Thus began Theodoric's great campaign. In 489, he led his people, men, women, and children alike, across the Alps and into the heart of Italy. It was not just a military expedition, it was a migration, the forging of a new homeland. Battles erupted quickly. At the Battle of the Isonzo and later the Adda River, Theodoric's forces decisively defeated Odoacer's army. Yet Odoacer retreated to Ravenna, Italy's heavily fortified capital, and prepared for a protracted siege. For nearly 3 years, from 490 to 493, Theodoric tried to take Ravenna, but the city's defenses and Odoacer's resolve held firm. It was only after mediation by Bishop John of Ravenna that a truce was brokered. According to the agreement, Theodoric and Odoacer would rule Italy jointly. But just days after Odoacer emerged from the city and shared a ceremonial feast with Theodoric, treachery struck. On March 15, 493 CE, Theodoric personally assassinated Odoacer, reportedly splitting his rival in two with a sword blow during the banquet. With Odoacer's followers slaughtered or dispersed, Theodoric now stood alone as the undisputed ruler of Italy. Though the murder was brutal, it marked the beginning of one of the most stable reigns in Italy since the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Theodoric did not claim the title of emperor. Instead, he ruled as Rex Italiae, king of the Goths and Romans, while still acknowledging the nominal authority of the Eastern emperor. But within Italy, he was the true sovereign. He held court in Ravenna, governed from Milan and Verona, and maintained Rome as a spiritual and cultural center. Theodoric's vision for his kingdom was unique. Unlike other Germanic rulers who allowed Roman institutions to rot, he sought to preserve and even restore the legacy of the empire. He kept intact the Roman Senate, retained Roman administrators in civil posts, and issued laws based on Roman legal codes. At the same time, he ruled his Gothic people through traditional tribal structures. In effect, Italy became a dual society: Romans governed by Roman law, Goths by Gothic custom, but unified under a single authority. This delicate balance was made possible by Theodoric's charismatic leadership and political genius. He surrounded himself with both Gothic warriors and Roman intellectuals. He patronized classical learning, repaired aqueducts and roads, and commissioned grand buildings, including the majestic mausoleum of Theodoric in Ravenna, a symbol of his enduring ambition to merge two civilizations into one. Yet challenges remained. The religious divide between his Arian Christian faith and the Nicene orthodoxy of his Roman subjects created underlying tensions. Theodoric, to his credit, practiced remarkable tolerance. He protected Catholic clergy, forbade forced conversions, and emphasized mutual coexistence. But he was aware that religious divisions could be politically dangerous, especially as his position was always vulnerable to shifts in Byzantine policy. Abroad, Theodoric pursued a shrewd diplomacy. He married off his daughters and nieces to powerful rulers: Visigoths in Spain, Burgundians in Gaul, Vandals in Africa, creating a web of alliances that placed him at the center of a pan-Germanic and post-Roman network. He styled himself as the arbiter of Western affairs, a new kind of imperial figure, even if he never wore the purple robes of a Roman emperor. In less than 2 decades, Theodoric had transformed from a hostage in Constantinople to the master of Italy. He had defeated Odoacer, united the Ostrogoths, restored a measure of Roman order, and built a kingdom that would become a model for other Germanic rulers in the post-Roman world. But his rule was more than pragmatic, it was visionary. He understood that for his reign to last, it could not rest on the sword alone. It had to be legitimized through culture, law, and the very institutions of the empire he now claimed to guard. Theodoric ruled for over 30 years, a rare span of peace and stability in a time otherwise marked by chaos. Yet as the century wore on, shadows lengthened. The question of succession loomed large, and the empire in Constantinople watched Italy with growing suspicion. The future of the Ostrogothic Kingdom would depend on whether Theodoric's careful balance could endure without the man who had built it. When Theodoric the Great claimed victory over Odoacer in 493 CE and entered Ravenna, he did not inherit a flourishing empire. He inherited a fractured land, scarred by decades of political instability, economic erosion, and cultural disillusionment. Italy, once the heart of the Roman world, had become a contested ruin. But Theodoric did not come as a conqueror bent on destruction. He came as a builder. His vision was ambitious and paradoxical, to govern as a Gothic king while preserving the Roman world. Rather than tearing down what remained of Roman authority, Theodoric sought to sustain it, repair it, and rule through it. He chose Ravenna, the last capital of the Western Roman Empire, as the seat of his new Ostrogothic Kingdom. Strategically located in the marshlands of northeastern Italy, Ravenna had long served as a military stronghold, imperial residence, and religious center. Its imposing walls, Byzantine-style churches, and imperial palaces made it both a practical and symbolic choice. Under Theodoric, Ravenna entered a new golden age. Theodoric transformed the city into a cultural and administrative beacon. He commissioned new buildings in the style of Roman and early Christian architecture, blending Gothic taste with classical grandeur. The most iconic of these is the Mausoleum of Theodoric, a circular stone structure with a monolithic dome, built not only as a royal tomb, but as a visible testament to his reign's permanence. Elsewhere, churches and public works sprang up, including renovations to the aqueducts, roadways, and walls. Theodoric understood that physical infrastructure was more than utility. It was legacy, but architecture alone could not secure his kingdom. To govern a realm where the majority of subjects were Roman and Latin-speaking, Theodoric had to maintain Roman institutions. Rather than dismantle the bureaucracy, he retained the Roman Senate, allowed the old imperial titles to persist, and placed Roman officials in positions of civil power. Key among these was Boethius, the Roman philosopher and statesman who served as Magister Officiorum, or Master of Offices, a chief administrator of the court. Boethius would later become one of the kingdom's most famous tragic figures, but in his prime, he embodied the possibility of Roman and Gothic cooperation. Theodoric's genius lay in his dual system of governance. While the civil administration remained in Roman hands, the military power resided with the Goths. The Gothic nobility formed the officer class of the kingdom's army, while Roman citizens were exempt from conscription and maintained their traditional civil roles. Each community, Roman and Gothic, was allowed to live under its own laws. Romans were judged by Roman law, Goths by Gothic custom. Theodoric even ensured that disputes between members of the two groups were settled by mixed courts. It was an intricate balancing act, and for nearly 3 decades, it worked. This separation of powers helped avoid widespread resentment, at least for a time. The Romans did not see Theodoric as a foreign tyrant because he respected their laws, their traditions, and their religion. Likewise, the Goths respected him as their military commander and king. To both groups, he was a guarantor of stability. Theodoric's religious policy also reflected his pragmatism. As an Arian Christian, he belonged to a branch of Christianity that was condemned as heretical by the Catholic Nicene Church. In many other kingdoms, this would have led to persecution or conflict. But Theodoric took a more enlightened path. He allowed religious tolerance to flourish. Catholic bishops were protected, churches were preserved, and theological debates were left to the clergy, not the state. He famously declared that he would not coerce belief, asserting that no one could be forced to believe against their conscience. This policy was not simply moral, it was political. Theodoric knew that religious strife could undermine his rule and fracture the delicate balance he maintained. But it also reflected a broader theme of his kingship. He sought not to replace Rome, but to stand in its tradition. Theodoric adopted the Roman ideal of a ruler as a custodian of order, princeps, one who upholds justice and peace. He surrounded himself with philosophers, legal scholars, and senators. He dressed in Roman robes for public ceremonies. And while he did not assume the title of emperor, he projected imperial dignity in all but name. Beyond Ravenna, Theodoric's policies extended across Italy. He repaired neglected infrastructure, settled Gothic soldiers on tax-exempt lands without displacing Roman landowners, and re-established trade routes. Markets revived, cities regained population, and a sense of normalcy returned to a region long racked by chaos. His rule extended into Dalmatia, parts of Gaul, and even into Pannonia, creating a realm that, for a time, rivaled the power of the Eastern Empire. But even amid this success, challenges lingered. The dual governance system, though effective, was inherently fragile. Beneath the surface, tensions between Romans and Goths never fully disappeared. Many Roman aristocrats saw the Goths as crude interlopers, while some Gothic leaders resented the privileged status of Roman elites. Religion, though managed peacefully, remained a fault line. Theodoric's own position was based entirely on his personal authority. There was no lasting institutional foundation to bridge the Gothic and Roman divide once he was gone. Still, during Theodoric's reign, Italy was arguably more stable and prosperous than at any point since the late Roman Empire. He had achieved something rare in the post-imperial world, a barbarian kingdom that governed through Roman law, administered by Roman officials, and sustained by Gothic arms. He offered a compelling model for what a successor state could be, not a destroyer of Rome, but its protector. This achievement was not accidental. It was the result of deliberate strategy, deep cultural knowledge, and a remarkable ability to mediate between two civilizations. Theodoric understood that brute force alone could not hold Italy. What the people longed for, after generations of invasion and political collapse, was continuity. He gave them that, not by pretending the empire still lived, but by building something new in its image. Yet the very nature of his success was also its greatest vulnerability. Theodoric had no air of equal ability. His arrangements depended heavily on his personal authority, his diplomatic skill, and his unique ability to command respect from both Goths and Romans. When he died in 526 CE, the kingdom he built would begin to unravel. But in his lifetime, Theodoric had proven what many believed impossible: that a Gothic king could rule Rome not as a barbarian overlord, but as a steward of civilization.